The White Sox are expected to lose 100 games again this season, but that doesn't mean they don't have enough talent to have some spring training position battles. Let's break it down with my guest next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. Thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the White Sox, again, are going to be terrible this season, but they'll be having a lot of position battles in spring training. And I discussed that with host of Sox in the Basement podcast, Chris Lanuti. But before we get to that, Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Chris, thanks for joining me. There's going to be a lot of position battles here in spring training. So let's start. Who do you think would actually end up winning the shortstop spring training battle? Is it going to be Colson Montgomery, Brooks Baldwin, or, God, I hope it's not Lenyn Sosa?
Well, the thing is, I believe the team wants it to be Colson Montgomery. And I take that from listening to those that are much closer to the team than I am, right? Like I spoke with Scott Merkin on our show, and I always, whenever I have him on, I try to read between the lines in what he's saying because he's getting a lot of really close information. He's reporting, he's trying to, give a good perspective of it. But when you hear him start to lean towards a player, that's because somebody's talking about that player a little bit too much. And I hear Chris Getz talk about Montgomery, and I hear them kind of hyping him up. And I think the team really wants him to come in spring, be good, and they want to give him the job. I think that's what they want to do. I don't know if it's a good idea. He was really bad last year until the last couple of weeks of the minor league season, and then he did well in the Arizona Fall League. I mean, and everybody does well there. There are guys that never make it to the majors that have huge seasons in the Arizona Fall League. So I don't think he's done enough to be up here, but I think the team wants him badly to be up here. And if it doesn't work out, it's probably Brooks Baldwin or Lenyn Sosa. Like, I think Sosa's defense is terrible, but his bat was so good the last couple of months. I'd like to see him somewhere on the team because I think he finally figured out major league pitching. And what do you have to lose in a season when you're not really going to win anything? Maybe he became something at the very end there. I'd be curious to see if he can continue those last couple months of the season into 2025, but I'd hate to see him out there butchering shortstop.
Yeah, I mean, he's the Godfather 3 line of he just keeps drawing you back in just when you want to be done with him. That's why I don't want to see him I don't mind if he's at second because if he, misses a double play on a pivot, fine, or bobbles the ball, fine. But shortstop, I just don't want to see hits going up the middle. Brooks Baldwin, I would prefer if Colson Montgomery isn't ready. And that's the thing. I really want them to take a very, very constructive eye when it comes to what is he doing in Arizona, because as you said, the air is dry, the ball's going to carry. I think it can't hurt to have him start out at AAA, but at the same point, the expectations are so low. So, who cares where he is? But I want to make sure he reaches that Corey Seager ceiling and not his Paul DeJong floor.
Well, it feels weird, right? I mean, if not to interrupt you, but it feels weird. I mean, everybody who's putting together a prospect list is taking him off of their list or dropping him considerably off of their list. Like, anybody that's scouting him from the outside looking in is like, he doesn't have the same amount of promise that he had 12 months ago. But the team is ready to basically anoint him, it feels like. And it feels like the rush of getting Gordon Beckham here may be a little bit too early. Definitely the rush of getting Andrew Vaughn here a little bit too early. And that's why I'm nervous about it.
No, I fully agree with you on that. And that's, and I had Herb on the show yesterday and talking about that, like, it can't hurt to just tap the brakes. But at the same point, him dropping down the rankings doesn't bother me as much because at this point, I just want to see what he can do now at the major league level. But at the same point, you got to walk that tightrope with him because you don't obviously want to rush him like Gordon Beckham or Andrew Vaughn, because again, I want him to be like Corey Seager, like he's supposed to be, not because I think he's going to be a big league player, but I'm very afraid that he is going to be Paul DeJong because he had a very similar season to Paul DeJong in the minors, especially in a ballpark where the ball is supposed to travel very, very far.
Well, he sounds like he bulked up. That's the one thing I got. Courtney Finicum was on the last episode of Sox in the Basement. She interviewed him and she said he got big. And she said, and he got big in a big way. like in a good way. Like, so she was impressed by his physique, and she said there was a real physical change in him. So who knows? Maybe he's having an off season that we just don't understand yet, and he's going to surprise us.
Courtney's awesome, by the way. Who do you see winning the second base job? We got Chase Mydroth, again, Lenine Sosa, and potentially Brooks Baldwin.
Actually, I think it's going to be Josh Rojas. And the reason is I don't think he's going to be the third baseman. I think Miguel Vargas is going to stand at third base. I mean, I really feel that way after talking to Merck, kind of reading a lot of things that are being said by the front office. I don't think they're going to give up on the guy. I think they want to give him an opportunity. They're not going to put him at first base because they brought Andrew Vaughn back. He's got to have a spot somewhere. He's at least going to get some time at third base. I think Rojas was brought on his team to play. Like he's like, my feeling on Rojas is that he's there. He's one of those players that's a real Major League Baseball player that somebody's going to have to take his job. Like, if you're a young player, you're going to have to outplay him to take the job. And you should be able to outplay him if you belong on this team and the future of the White Sox as they try to rebuild and figure out what they have and what they want to use as a core moving forward. So he's going to be somewhere in the infield, and he's not going to play short. And I don't think he's there to be like a utility guy. I think he's going to have an everyday spot. And if I think Miguel Vargas is going to be playing a lot, then I think that maybe Rojas is the second baseman. Like, I think Mydroth, he'd be my pick. Like, because he's been playing a lot of shortstop, but scouts project him to be more of a second baseman because of his arm strength. But he plays really good defense, and he's a very difficult out. He draws an awful lot of walks. He gets on base an awful lot. He looked like his AAA season, was good enough that he should be a Major League Baseball player. He might have been a steal in that trade that people aren't paying attention to, but he's not on the 40-man roster. And you're going to have a couple of names in this infield, I believe, that are guys that are getting one last look that maybe shouldn't be on the team. Like, I was not a fan of $6 million for a replacement level Andrew Vaughn, but he's back. You're going to march Miguel Vargas out there like he needs more at-bats, but the Dodgers gave him half a season of consistent at-bats, and it didn't work out for him. And then you gave him a bunch of at-bats in this season, and it didn't work out for him. But they're not going to give up on him, so he's going to play. So I feel like the guys that will be here halfway through the season are not the guys they're going to break camp with, because some guys are getting last chances, and I don't think they're going to work out.
Yeah, that just scares me when you say that, because the reason why I think more when you look at the defensive metrics, if I remember, and I'm just remembering off the top of my head, Rojas is just better suited to third base. I would rather have Miguel Vargas then go over to first, and you could just have Andrew Vaughn rotate at DH. But I get where you're coming from. Yes, it sounds like they're going to give Josh Rojas the shot at the second base, and I'm not totally against that either. It's just I think Chase Mydroth gives you more flexibility in terms of a guy getting on base, a guy that could field second base. What they're saying is he could probably field it very well. And, I just think Josh Rojas would fit better at third base. And again, when you can get more defensive stability at first, even though you don't need a ton there, because that's the biggest question mark in terms of the defense. The outfield, you're fine. You should be able to have guys that can catch the ball so long as you don't trade Luis Robert Jr. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's the infield. It's like, that defense outside of Rojas, kind of sketchy.
Well, there's a difference between what you want to see them do and what I think they're going to do, right? Like, if you let me pick what I would hope would work out for this team, I put Rojas over a third, because I don't think Brian Ramos is ready yet. I mean, he talks a great game, but I don't think he's ready yet. And I haven't seen enough in AAA that says he can hit well enough to be an everyday third baseman in the major leagues. And I didn't believe in Vargas when they traded for him. A lot of people think that I'm being unfair, but I follow that guy's career because I play a lot of fantasy baseball, and he was like one of my big prospects I held on to. And I followed his minors, and I was really intent. Like, I studied more Miguel Vargas, I would say, than most White Sox fans over the last couple of years. And I think he's a bust already. So to me, I would have had Rojas over at third. I would have been fine with the idea of if Montgomery's ready, he's ready. And if not, we've got to probably have a Brooks Baldwin sitting there at short, or go out and get a shortstop that's a bridge until you get to Montgomery. And then I would have had Mydroth over at second, and I wouldn't have brought back Andrew Vaughn. I would have let Lenine Sosa stand at first base and see whether or not the bat actually plays, because he's not going to be as much of a liability defensively standing over there, and it's not an unheard of thing. Or if you really want to give Vargas at bats, have him stand at first, because I don't think Andrew Vaughn's going to be any more than what he is, and you need more than that at first base in the American League in that ballpark than what he's actually providing. I mean, he's not a terrible player, but he's just a replacement level player, and you can pick up him. You can pick up his stats and his wins above replacement for about a third of what they paid for this year. you're going to have anybody stand there and do that at first base. There's plenty of guys out there right now you can bring in that are going to bring in the same amount of wins and the same amount of production as what he's done over the last couple of years. So what I think they should do is I think different what they're actually going to do. And that's kind of the weird thing when you talk about this infield.
Yeah, then that's where we can go down the rabbit hole on there. But what about catcher too? Because another thing is, again, what we would like to do is another thing you could do is you could have Edgar Carroll or Kyle Teal if they're ready, have one of those guys stand at first base. But what do you think is going to happen at catcher?
Well, first of all, I think Edgar Carroll is getting a shot. I mean, I read an interview with him over the winter here, and it was on MLB.com. And the way he talks like somebody who's been told by the team that he's making the team. Like he's a big, like, we're going to do this year. This is the kind of team it's going to be. I can't wait to be there. And he's done enough that you can make the argument that he should get a shot, especially if he comes out and has a good spring training. Now, defensively, I don't think that long-term he's the catcher now that Kyle Teal is there. And so he's probably going to end up in another spot. And a lot of Major League Baseball teams recently have broken in catchers that hit well, like Carroll has been doing, and may have some defensive issues or may not be the best option at catcher. And it's very difficult to run a staff, let alone a staff that's going to be full of rookies. And a lot of teams, the Pirates have done it. I want to say the Braves did it with Contreras before he ended up in Milwaukee. They take these guys, they put them in the outfield, they put them at DH, they put them at first base, because it takes out the complicated nature of learning catcher in the major leagues and running a staff. And it allows him to first get over the bump of jumping from AAA to the major leagues as a hitter. So yes, I do believe Edgar Carroll has a great chance of making this team. I don't think he'll be a catcher per se out of the box. Not that he won't get to catch a game once a week, maybe on a Sunday, but I don't think he's going to be primarily playing catcher. I think your catcher for now is going to be one of these veterans that they brought in, and you know, your guy from last year. You know, I mean, like, that's, you're bringing in Corey Lee and he's going to get the majority of time still. Eventually, you want to see Teal there. I know he's chomping at the bit to make it there this year. I don't know if that'll happen. You want to see Carroll eventually. Can he do it? Can he play the position? But again, I think your team breaking camp is going to be one last look, or hold this guy here because we're not ready to rush the guy who's going to eventually get the job. And you're going to have a very different roster when everything breaks than what you're going to have, let's say, July 1st.
Being a Bears fan means you don't get to see many playoff games. I was lucky enough as a kid to see the Bears play in a few live and in person with my dad. Granted, the Dallas Cowboys beat the Bears as they started their 1990s dynasty march, and looking back, it was actually kind of neat to see Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin take their first steps towards winning all those Super Bowls. And if you want to catch a major event live, like a playoff game, I suggest using the Gametime app. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Now, it may not be an NFL game, but I've been telling my brother-in-law who wants to get tickets for tomorrow's Marquette and UConn game, two top Big East college hoops battling it out, that he should use the Gametime app to find tickets since it's sold out. And, you know, he's going to get a panoramic view of the seat that he intends to buy, plus all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms, so make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. So closer, I think, is actually one position that I think is getting overlooked. I know a lot of people are focusing in on who's going to be the opening day starter, but, you know, the White Sox will have some leads. It did happen last year, and I know they don't need to have a designated closer, but, you know, somebody that you can rely on. I think what I've read, it's been Justin Anderson, but then they just signed Karinchak. Who do you think would maybe be fitting to be the guy that gets the ball at the ninth inning and then hopefully doesn't blow as many saves as the 37 that happened with the White Sox bullpen in 2024?
You know, closer is interesting because I have a philosophy when it comes to pitching, especially when it comes to relief pitchers. I say it on my show all the time. Relief pitchers are a dime a dozen. And I've had Don Paul on, like, multiple times. Relief pitcher, former relief pitcher of the White Sox. I mean, we had Liam Hendricks on the show once, and I've talked a lot of relief pitching, and Hendricks was a converted starter. And if you talk to these guys either on the air or off the air, they'll admit it to you. Like a lot of really good relief pitchers are failed starters. And a lot of it is streakiness, and you can get off to a bad start. I remember when Joe Kelly had that, when he came in and he had coming off the injury and he had a couple of really bad outings right off the bat. And I asked Don Paul, longtime White Sox relief pitcher, now retired, does that get in your head when you see an ERA of like 11.5? And I thought he was going to say no. And he goes, yeah, that basically snowballs the whole season. That hurts you when you see that. You're always chasing it because you don't get a lot of appearances. You don't get a lot of innings. So a relief pitcher can be good one year and suck the next. He can keep guys off base effectively one year and then not be able to do it the next year. Only the greats have any kind of consistency. A lot of them, it took a long time to get to it. So I look at this relief pitching staff and I go, it's a crapshoot. Like the guy you're going to probably try out multiple guys in that role. Anderson makes the most amount of sense to me right now, and he probably breaks camp as the closer. But in reality, I wouldn't have a problem with them saying we're going to go with the hot hand until we find one, because anybody here could be your closer. And eventually you may discover a guy that you're like, this is the right guy to close games, and we're not even considering him. And that's what the staff looks like. They've got a lot of arms. They got a lot of young guys. They may have somebody come and impress. They may have somebody who comes out and in the first month or so is just shutting down his inning, whether it be the 6th or the 7th, and eventually works his way into that role. Again, though, to me, they're a dime a dozen. It's the last thing you put together on a team. So it's not probably top of my mind because I'm not really that worried about it. Like whether or not you blow 10 saves this year or you swing it the other way isn't really going to change the outcome for what the season actually is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just more of the fact that, you'd like to have something to make sure that you don't ever flirt with 41 wins again,
Oh, yeah, I don't want that. Nobody wants that. I don't think they're going to do that, though. Like, I really don't. I think that they're going to be a better team this year. I think they have a better manager. Anything's better than what Pedro was. I think that there were several, they were a bad team last year, but the manager did have an impact on them being so bad. He could not pull them out of slumps. He did not have the heart of that team. You hear about, there was almost like a disconnect in the locker room. You got rookies like Corey Lee basically, shooting back at his manager in the press at one point. Like that was kind of a divided clubhouse that didn't like the manager. That contributes to those losses. That's why I don't think we're going to get to that this year.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm with you too on the bullpen. I mean, you basically should be building a bullpen with scrap heap arms, with players that you draft, especially, I would say round 6 through 15, you should always be drafting pitchers and have them be your bullpen.
Failed starters. Look at all these young guys you have. Not all of them are going to make the rotation, but some of them are going to be pretty good relief pitchers.
Yeah,
that's how you should look at this. When you look at this minor league pitching staff, all these names, a lot of these guys are solid prospects. They got little problems and stuff like that. Like, the guy that we got for Jake Berger in Eder, like he may not turn out to be one of the starting 5, but he may be one hell of a relief pitcher down the line. So like, and that's just an example, but you're going to see some of these guys, like the only 2 guys that I truly believe in that are going to be frontline starters aren't here yet. And that's Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith. And I think Drew Thorpe has got the goods. He had a couple of bad starts, but you know what? He's a guy, I think he's got the goods. So they've got 3 names right there that I think in a year are going to be sitting there saying, look at this. We got some 3 really solid starting pitchers. That only leaves 2 more spots left. And several more than that are already in the majors getting their chance in the rotation. And there's several more guys down there that are possibilities. Not everybody's getting a starting spot. So I think their relief pitching situation over the next year or so is going to start to evolve, because pitchers that can't make it into the rotation but are good enough arms are going to start coming up, and one of them may become a converted closer. And so that's why I don't worry about, they have such a strong pitching staff, and Brian Bannister is doing such a good job right now, and you can actually see his impact, that I think they will eventually find the back end guys in their own system because they're overloaded with arms. They do have that advantage right now as a team in their build and in their depth. That pitching depth is really good right now.
So opening day starter, does that mean anything? Because I know that there's, like Brad Biggs was bringing that up on the score, like who's going to be in the opening day starter for the Sox? And it's like, well, first of all, it's a ceremonial thing in in my opinion, but should it really even matter for a team that, again, is probably going to win 60 games?
No, I don't think it really matters. I think the interesting thing will be, does Venable say Martin Perez because he's a veteran and he wants to take all the pressure off of somebody? Because whoever becomes the opening day starter is going to start feeling that they're the ace. They're going to line up the most against somebody else's ace all year long. People don't get that. Like, whoever's your opening starter, whoever's like in that 1 and 2 spot, I mean, every once in a while, they won't line up. But a lot of times you're going to go up against other teams' 1s and 2s. And now all of a sudden, the margin for error is smaller. That pitcher goes out there knowing I'm going up against so-and-so, and he's going to give up 2 runs. So I got to be perfect. That puts a lot of pressure on a young guy. So unless somebody is like, symbolically in their mind is going to be a front-end guy or had an amazing spring and they leave it open and they give it to somebody because he earned it, I would imagine it's probably Perez because he's a vet. He's, he's had good seasons, but not a lot of them. I think he's pretty much a 4th or 5th starter on a good team. But he's a vet. He's somebody that Venable knows because he was in Texas. And I think that it takes the pressure off the younger guys because otherwise they're going to be coming in or trying to be perfect against the other team's ace. So that's why I think he'll be the guy up at the top of it, even if he really isn't the number 1.
I like how you brought up too being perfect, because while Jonathan Cannon I thought was very solid last year, there were times where you could tell like he was trying to go 7-8 innings because that was the only way that they were going to have a chance of winning. You had that a little bit with Davis Martin. So I like that, I would probably go with Martin Perez. I'm still holding out hope that they, the price comes down on Jose Quintana and they bring him in. I wouldn't mind having 2 veteran starters like him and Perez. I don't want Bryce Wilson in the starting rotation just because his numbers play better to the bullpen than being a starter. And especially he's only going to be here for a year. I'd rather leverage again, just somebody to protect some leads here every now and again. But I would definitely go with Perez too, just because he knows what he's doing. He's actually coming up off on an upswing. He had 10 really good starts against San Diego. He did make 1 All-Star team. You're right. He's a 4th or 5th starter at best, but he has had a career season. He should be enough to be the guy that takes the opening day start. So Luis Robert Jr., a lot of rumors coming up lately that the Reds tried to make an offer. The White Sox want 2 top 5 prospects for him. Do you think they're being completely unrealistic in terms of trying to make that demand? I know why they're making the demand, but I think the trade market's been trying to tell them you're not going to get that unless he starts proving that he can be 2023 Luis Robert Jr.
I think it's a matter of perception. And this was illustrated to me in kind of a back and forth, a little bit of argument on Sox of the Basement with Scott Merkin in the last month. Because I brought it up. I said I felt like Luis Robert Jr. dogged it last year. I think the moment that his team was out of it, he was like depressed and he seemed like he was swinging at the ball and couldn't wait to get back to the bench. Like he's chasing everything that's outside. Like the effort wasn't there. And I felt that the team might be annoyed with him. Like, because I look at it and I go, look, you got him under control. If you really think he's a star, $15 million, $20 million, and $20 million for the next 3 years is a good price if you really think he is the Luis Robert Jr. from 2023 instead of the one from 2024. And you are going to be a competitive team, at least in that last year, I think. I really do think you can turn this thing around the timetable. You got a lot of young guys that are close to the majors. So you don't necessarily have to move them. I get why they want to move him, but you don't necessarily have to. So my thing was, maybe the motivation is that they don't like his work ethic, and he's always injured. Now, Merck shot back. Well, no, everybody in the building thinks that he's a hard worker, and they don't think that he was doing that. And he puts every effort in, and he just wasn't following the scouting report because he's chasing balls, and that's why he's going back to the bench so quick. And then I would counter, well, but he knows the scouting report. He's been in the majors long enough. He knows he shouldn't be chasing. So why is he chasing all of a sudden and running back to the bench? So we disagreed on that. I think what I took from that is the White Sox themselves value him more than the rest of Major League Baseball. I'm the rest of Major League Baseball. I'm the guy on the outside looking in. And I'm like, look at this guy. Look at his performance. His head's down. Seems miserable. There's images on the internet. All I have to do is Google him. He's sitting at the end of the bench, and he looks like he hates being there, right? And he had a terrible season. Why would I give you a bunch of good prospects and pay all that salary? Like, that's what happened with the Reds. The Reds were like, well, we'll give you these prospects, but you got to pay some money. That's what Ken Rosenthal is reporting. And so, and it sounds like they may not have been the only team that said that to the White Sox. So perception-wise, the White Sox see him as 2023 Luis Robert Jr., who had a bad year. And everybody else sees him as, here's a guy at the moment the going gets tough, he didn't want to keep going. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but prove it to me. And I'm not about to give you great prospects and pay all that money and look like a fool. So the White Sox, I think, are going to have to keep him. They're going to have to play him. If he has a great first half, he's going to get traded.
Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms.
And if he doesn't have a great first half, they're going to have to ask for less if they really want to move on from him.
Chris, before we move forward, where can we always find your good stuff?
Well, you can get Sox in the Basement anywhere a podcast can be found, always at soxinthebasement.com. That's what I always tell everybody. I mean, like, our stuff is there. I'm also the owner of the Broadcast Basement On Demand radio network that does all kinds of podcasts around Chicagoland. We do one for Evergreen Park. We do one for the Village of Lamont. There's Southside Pod, which is coming back this month. There's a bunch of independent podcasts that are on that. You can see the whole list of those at broadcastbasement.com.
So,
and I'm teaching a class. I'm a professor now. You can take my podcasting class at Moraine Valley Community College down on the south side starting this summer, and then into the fall. There'll be a fall class. I'm teaching people. It's called Podcasting for a Living, and I'm teaching people how to podcast and make money doing it.
Nice. I actually like how, though, getting back, brought Luis Robert Jr., and they might be annoyed with him. I actually think they're afraid of him. This is just my hypothesis. I think they're afraid he's going to get hurt again, because I like how you brought that up, because when I was listening to Chris Getz, for example, on 670 The Score, he brought it up that, well, he was just hurt, and he was a 5-WAR player in 2023, but he kept going back to he's just hurt. I think they are afraid that he's going to get hurt again, and then you're going to have a little Yohan Moncada situation where then you got to pay him $2 million just to go away. So I think they're trying to get what they want for him, but as you said, they're trying to get him for way more than what he's worth, and that is right now maybe an Edwin Arroyo, because he was hurt. That was the offer too.
One of the things we talk about on the show a lot, and we've talked with athletic trainers, and we brought up the idea that some of these White Sox players who got hurt all the time were almost bodybuilding instead of baseball bodybuilding. You know, it's great to have all the muscles. It's great to look good with your shirt off, but baseball players, it's all about flexibility. It's all about, you don't need to have this Greek god figure to play baseball. And what's really funny is we talked about on the last show when we were comparing this team and the current baseball players that were on this last little rebuild that we thought was going to be this great core to the guys in 2005. I mean, that whole team, they just drank beer and played baseball. That's what they did. Mark Buehrle is drinking beer in Game 3. Freddie Garcia at Sox Fest never put one down, according to Courtney Finicum when she came out to talk about it. Ozzie Guillen was hanging out, drinking in the locker room after every game. They came up with Don't Stop Believing while they were all drinking, doing karaoke. Like, they weren't like finely tuned athletes, these guys. They were ball players. They were loose. They were having a good time. They were ball players. And it feels like whatever was going on this team with a lot of these players, like trying to look as good as possible and building these massive sets of muscles, and you see their Instagrams, well, you pull a lot of muscles doing that, and your body isn't as loose. And so maybe this new front office, they realize that. And they look at a guy like Luis Robert Jr. and say, yeah, when he's healthy, he's great, but he's not going to be able to sustain that because of the way he builds his body up.
Yeah, and the other thing that just baffles me, though, about Luis Robert Jr., remember, wasn't his athletic trainer that helped him in 2023 turn things around? Like, that's how bad Pedro Grifol was a coach. I remember him like, well, why don't we do these swinging exercises? But you're right. I just think that they're afraid that he's going to get hurt. They're trying to get something for him now on that. So speaking of the previous rebuild, now with all these prospects, and I've been asking any guest that comes on, should we have guarded optimism or just all-out hope when it comes to the prospects? And this is just your opinion. I'm not asking you to tell out people, out of fans. Just what do you think?
I think the White Sox have they're really good at pitching and catching. I think they have enough prospects and enough guys with upside that I think they're going to find really good pitchers, and they're going to find a really good catcher, if not find another guy in that group that can play someplace else. So I think that they look really good there. I love that. They don't have a ton of depth in the outfield. They don't have enough prospects there. They've got to figure out. They're going to have to find something. And just sitting around and waiting on Montgomery, who you just got from Boston, that's only one position out of 3 standing out there. And I don't know what your long-term plan is. So you're weak there. You're also kind of weak in the infield. And so what I see good prospects, good pitching, but they're having a really hard time corralling enough hitting prospects. That's their problem. And positional players are harder to get. If you're paying attention, they're having a very hard time making trades to get positional players back. There's almost like a premium on it in Major League Baseball, because once you teach a guy how to hit in the modern game, and you bring him from that high school or college level to where he's getting close to the majors and he's a legit hitting prospect, teams don't want to give that up because they're hard to find. Pitching prospects seem to be far easier to acquire in trades because they have upside. Their arm could fall off, but it just seems like it's easier to find them. So the Sox did a good job of grabbing a lot of those. And I think that they're going to be fine with that, and that's good because their owner's cheap, and he's never going to spend a ton of money on pitching. So you need to always have young arms that you can move on from when they get close to the fact that they're going to need a new contract, and you can move another guy in. So they've set up really well there, but they're still lacking. They don't have enough depth for some of the other positions that are out there. So they're going to eventually have to spend in free agency, or they're going to have to create more prospects either through the draft or trading a guy like Luis Robert Jr. away.
Yeah, that's why I'm more of actually being patient than being guarded optimistic or just fully optimistic, because I still think this is about 2 or 3 drafts to a full completion. I'm with you on 2027. Could they get back to be competitive by then? Maybe, yeah, because you really just need 4 or 5 bats and starting rotation and a decent bullpen, and you can be competitive in the AL Central. But if you want to talk about sustained success, and that's, I think, what anybody would want, you need a couple more drafts, especially with hitting prospects in rounds 1 through 4.
Well, if you're smart, Todd,
yeah,
your pitching comes along, and you've got that great battery, and you've got 1 or 2 guys on your team that are good, right? You're not spending a lot of money here. You could bring this thing back up to being a middle of the road payroll again by adding a few free agents and be ready to go in 26 or 27 if the pitching comes along. That's the key. When the pitching comes along, will they spend enough to field a real team?
I think that it's going to be, will they spend it wisely? Because Jerry has allowed a certain amount of money. It's just, it always went to the bullpen. It's like it should have went to second base or it should have went to right field, and it never went there. It went to the bullpen.
I agree with that. Yeah, 100%.
So one last question then. Over under 50 wins. Where are you at?
Over. I think they're going over 50 wins. I think they'll go over it. They may surprise. You got a new young manager. Like I said, I love this young pitching staff. And if you see some of these guys that got up there, you see Drew Thorpe start to really pitch this year, now his second time through. You see Jonathan Cannon start to do like a little bit more. There's a couple of young guys that may make it up here and get the pitch halfway through the year. I think the pitching is going to be a big difference. And I think that just the manager coming in and not being Pedro Grifol is at least going to get you 9 more wins, And so and they could actually not lose 100. I know everybody's just assuming they're going to lose 100. They might lose 95. But they're going to be bad, but I just don't think we're going to see that level of bad this year.
All right. Well, Chris, I appreciate your time. Thanks you for coming on.
Thanks, Todd.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back on Monday with a discussion on whether the White Sox should consider trading Luis Robert Jr. to a division rival. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion with Chris Lanuti, host of Sox in the Basement podcast. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. I will see you on Monday.